But what truly matters the most is the journey. Dimitri's journey to kingship is unlike any other Fire Emblem protagonist. We've never had a lord so ensnared by the darkness of trauma to where they were at the whims of circumstance. Three Houses wasn't the first game to make interesting lords. I mean, Ike's literally over there, man. But its three main lords left one of the strongest impressions on the Fire Emblem fanbase. Today, we'll zone in specifically on the deranged Blue Lion himself, Dimitri Alexandre Blaidydd. He subverted the tropes of a typical Fire Emblem lord enough to cement him as the unique one among them all. His existence and the quality of his writing, whether you love him or hate him, makes him an important main character in this franchise. Let's explore that. Now, I must preface that this analysis will not have a huge emphasis on the following subjects: lore, Fotland politics, Fotland history, family history, every detail and backstory, every support conversation, irrelevant characters to the topic, and anything Three Hopes related, because I never played it. This video focuses on the mentality of Dimitri and the distinctive nature of his character arc. I'm only using information relevant to the subject at hand. If I mention anything that I just listed, it'll be brief if it serves the discussion or a point made. I want this video to be different. There are plenty of excellent videos loaded with information from creators who have more of a documentary style. So if there's missing information, I'm aware of that because it probably didn't serve the discussion. Dimitri is the Prince of Fargus and the leader of the Blue Lion House. His introduction's a modest one. One might not think much of him from the first impression, but you know what I first spotted? Well, Dimitri, my boy, my Boar. I respect you, man, but what is that catastrophe up there, man? Oh, soggy noodle head ass. He's presented as the more polite and honorable of the three lords, a direct contrast to the headstrong and ambitious Edelgard. When I first saw him, I thought Dimitri was just going to be your typical heroic, honorable lord who upheld all the morals of chivalry and all that jazz. His kind disposition just exuded that sort of energy, and it painted a picture of him fitting the criteria of a standard Fire Emblem hero. I've mentioned this in 2 videos already, but Black Eagle Silver Snow was my first route, so the lack of spotlight on him maintained that first impression. That is, until I heard this monastery dialogue in pre-chapter 12 exploration.
I'll have that girl's head. Just you wait.
The savagery and cold delivery of the line was but a sample of how different this guy was going to be. Byleth's unvoiced dialogue and post-prologue expressed their own first impressions. The foreshadowing alone of "I sense darkness underneath" was spectacular. To build intrigue around this unassuming prince and hints at his appearances concealing a second half. Hell, when Dimitri's ghost appeared in Silver Snow, that only made me hungrier for more insight on the guy, which probably aided in me finishing Silver Snow as fast as I did. Would've laughed my ass off if Ghost Dimitri happened to still be in savage mode though. Bro just visits Byleth foaming at the mouth like a rabid animal like "Professor, why you no teach my class?" Then Byleth just has a panic attack on the spot. Would make poor Seta think he's going crazy or ate a bad mushroom like a certain meat-headed Giga Chad. Anyway, it's clear that throughout most of White Clouds, we're presented with Dimitri wearing his morals on his sleeves. Moments such as killing civilians in Lonatzo's rebellion in Chapter 3 highlighted his soft-hearted ideals. He is, at heart and despite his brute strength, a gentle prince who prioritized the people. Even the idea of accepting victims of conflict as a reality of war is enough to anger him. That alone was enough to assume that'd be as deep as it went for him. But he's purposely written as a foil to Edelgard throughout both parts of Blue Lions. Their final in-game conversation with each other only cemented that fact. Much of his dialogue in White Clouds is a much softer approach to each incident at the monastery. It's clear that if Dimitri and Edelgard spent more time together in White Clouds, the two would have argued consistently, all because of their clashing personalities and ideals. He's shown to have the prerequisite qualities of a benevolent leader, trying to stay level-headed with everyone and abolish any walls between them. Dimitri scoffed at the barriers nobility placed between them and commoners. Supports such as Ashes and Deduz demonstrated how much stock he placed in respecting his peers as equals, despite their social standing. He's naive, but unnaturally considerate and mindful of his words. But just like that clip I showed, darkness truly lurked underneath the surface, and tragedy would be a constant challenge to his morality. So, what type of character arc does Dimitri have? Well, similar to my Marianne video, we'll be using K.M. Weiland's Arthur's Guide as a point of reference. Weiland's depiction of arcs is what I consider the most accurate breakdown of them on a fundamental level. She separates arcs into 3 categories: the positive change arc, the flat arc, and a negative change arc. He's clearly not a flat arc, as those types of characters are an already stable person, one who doesn't embark on a major change, someone who's already emotionally developed before the story began. Instead, flat arc characters evoke change in those around them and their world, so characters like Raphael, for example, or if you want to delve outside the realm of Fire Emblem, Son Goku from Dragon Ball. Positive change arc is one where a character will typically struggle with personal unfulfillment and denial of whatever their circumstances are. They usually want something, and they're believing a certain lie, as Wyland describes it, that holds them back from getting what they want. The character goes through a series of events which challenge their belief in the lie. What this character wants is often something they either really don't need, or they're not mentally or physically worthy of it yet. What they need is the truth, so they can set themselves on the right path to get what they want as well, provided it's a necessary goal. Dimitri's arc is 100% a positive change arc. One could make an argument for the negative change arc, since it's literally just the positive change arc but inverted. Characters in those types of arcs develop into a far worse state than where they started. However, that's only if they allow the lie to consume them in the end. Since Azure Moon is Dimitri's story, it's a bit disingenuous to consider his arc a negative change one when he's the antagonist in other arcs, so of course he's written in a negative light in those. Dedue himself confirms things in chapter 18's Monastery Conversations. He remarks on everyone's happiness about Dimitri changing back to who he was, yet he knew better than anyone that the Boar was always Dimitri. It just finally surfaced on the outside for everyone to witness, but we'll get into the specifics on that point later. Let me make an important note here, and please read what's on screen carefully. From this point forward, I'll be using terms lie, need, truth, and other identifiers from Wyland's book as synonymous labels. It'll roll off the tongue better, and it'll be easier to understand how thoughtfully crafted his arc is overall. Almost all good writing instinctively follows this structure without even being aware of it. Let's first identify what Dimitri wants. He reveals to Byleth that his true motive for enrolling in the academy is to exact revenge. For those watching this who, for some reason, haven't played the game, Dimitri is a survivor of a historic massacre called the Tragedy of Duscur. I'll have on-screen information detailing the incident, but it was a traumatic event that gave birth to the wounds that created his lie. The powerlessness Dimitri felt incited his journey towards vengeance. The young prince, understandably so, suffered severe psychological damage. He has a strong case of PTSD from the event, and it bred his delusions. Dimitri suffers from similar symptoms of schizophrenia, where he's hearing the voices of his deceased loved ones from the tragedy. In Flame's A support, Dimitri confessed to losing his sense of taste 9 years ago. That aligns with the same year the tragedy of Duscur occurred. Losing one's sense of taste in real life can be attributed to multiple factors, but there are rare cases of depression having physical side effects due to trauma. A loss of taste is one of many. Dimitri constantly lamented on being the sole survivor of the tragedy, and felt he deserved to die with everyone else. His support conversations with Marianne puts this on full blast. These two are a fan favorite pair for that very reason, due to their mutual experience. He also has painful headaches from time to time, which hint at his constant dwelling on the past and a struggle of coping with the voices of the deceased. These headaches only intensified as the years went on, and the events of Garrett Mach sped up the process of deteriorating his sanity. The point of mentioning all of this is to illustrate just how much of an internal conflict is going on. Wyland states that the biggest conflict of a positive change arc is one of a silent war inside the character, one against the character's want and need. So Dimitri's grandest battle takes place in his struggle for enacting justice, but the delusions bred from his lie blinded him from taking the right steps to move forward. It prevented him from acting on what he needed to do. We'll identify Dimitri's need later when we cover his truth. Because of Dimitri's deteriorated mental state, it's easy to identify the lie in his character arc. Dimitri believed he must fight on behalf of the dead. It not only stopped them from tormenting him, but also bring closure to the incident and do what the dead can't even wish for. Dimitri's entrenched within the false belief that the deceased are haunting and goading him to avenge them. And this is no fault of his own. Dimitri just can't magically cure his PTSD by himself. If it worked like that in real life, mental health wouldn't be nearly as impactful of a crisis as it is is now. Dimitri didn't receive the help he needed in that tender time during the aftermath, where the lie manifested itself and gripped him like the plague. Like Edelgard, it left him with no choice but to come up with his own coping mechanism. While both lords didn't cope well and allowed their lies to dictate them, Dimitri arguably handled his pain the worst between the two. That's mainly because he didn't follow his own advice. What do I mean by this? Well, let's examine why Gerald's death was key in understanding Dimitri's perspective on handling loss and moving on. In opposition to Edelgard's apathetic view of handling grief, Dimitri opts for a more gentle philosophy. He doesn't believe it to be weak to take the time and grieve the loss of those precious. His story told to Byleth is a direct gateway into what happened to Dimitri during the tragedy's aftermath. He spent a fair bit of time lamenting his losses and, over time, found the strength to get back on his feet and pursue his goal of vengeance. Dimitri's philosophy isn't wrong, it's sound advice when filtering out his lust for revenge and looking at grief from a broader scope. The problem is that Dimitri doesn't take his own advice, and it's because of one crucial missing element: support. Byleth had their friends, and Dimitri, to be there when dealing with their emotions. Dimitri had no one to speak to about his feelings. Everyone in this damn game needed therapy. Plus, he figured out the wrong thing to live on for, as he tells Byleth to identify what it was they lived for, and cling on to it. Other scenes displayed Dimitri's hypocrisy and flipped right back on him in part 2, such as when he's confessing to Byleth about their lack of emotional responses. Yet, Byleth's dialogue choices allow you to turn his own words and philosophies back at him, all in order to remind and lead him back on the correct path.
Professor, I'm sorry to intrude, but you don't look too happy for someone who just won.
Idiots. Embracing death for the sake of that woman. Truly foolish. I don't know.
This hypocrisy in the subtext is deliberate and masterfully foreshadowed in part 1. This helps the player understand that while Dimitri knows how to move forward, he doesn't know how to apply that knowledge to his own benefit. His lies shrouded his eyes from the truth. Interestingly enough, Wyland describes the ghost in the Positive Change arc. The ghost is something from the character's past that haunts them, the wound inflicted by their traumatic experience. It doesn't mean a literal ghost in other character arcs, but in a twisted sense of irony in Dimitri's case, he's quite literally haunted by his delusions of dead family and friends to release the grip he has on the lie. Now we're heading into slight controversial territory with this chapter. Three Houses discourse in the Fire Emblem community is honestly one of the most shallow and pointless chain of debates, and the last thing I want to do is provoke it. However, we can't dig into the morality of the monster Dimitri surrendered to in Azure Moon before addressing Edelgard, or rather the Flame Emperor, and how that reveal was the trigger for unbounding the beast inside. Many criticize Dimitri to this day for the absurdity of accusing Edelgard for Duskur, and felt that it diminished his character. When you learn the truth yourself and consider the character's age, yeah, it's absolutely stupid of him to assume this little midget could fit inside that armor, since she was a small girl at the time, unless you use some stilts or something, I don't know. But try telling that to a dude whose final thread holding his sanity together snapped in that exact moment. Just look at the guy. Does this look like a man who still had the ability to exercise common sense? He's delusional. That's the whole point of his character arc. But anyway, the moment he saw his stepsister's face in the armor of the same person responsible for Duskur, it sliced that thin thread holding his sanity together, and his rational thought along with it. His supports with Dedu and other instances of revealing his past blatantly states that he saw who did it with his own eyes, but no one believed him. Edelgard's face triggered an overwhelming amount of emotions. We can only speculate on those exact emotions, as Dimitri's dialogue made it abundantly clear that he cared a great deal about Edelgard in the past. I'm willing to bet that denial was the very first emotion that struck him, but his trauma blinded him from using the critical part of his brain. This was all but one of many plots by the Agarthans, because yes, I'm using their actual name. I refuse to call them by that stupid nickname Hubert gave gave them, who are the true villains of this entire story, and those responsible for all known atrocities. Quite ingenious actually. By giving Edelgard the same armor as the one Dimitri witnessed the person committing the crime, that only served to make Dimitri antagonize her. And given that Arundel was Talus in disguise, he knew exactly how to attack Dimitri psychologically. The real Arundel was his step-uncle, so that allowed Talus to remain physically close for years. So Talus, within that time frame from Dusker to the Academy, knew how much the tragedy affected him. It's brilliant plotting because Dimitri was clearly suspicious of his uncle when we're shown the library scene, and Kronya and Solon donning disguises were there to give you the right clues that flew under every character's noses. When Talus, in his disguise, is killed in Azure Moon, his cryptic dying words were all the confirmation you needed that he orchestrated the entire feud between step-siblings. And we can't fault Edelgard for anything because he played her just like Dimitri. When even she didn't know what was going on, what could she actually say to Dimitri without pissing him off even more in his savage state? So, because of Talus's manipulation, this brought forth the emergence of Dimitri's internal darkness, the side of him that Dedue always knew, and the one that silently scared Felix shitless, the savage Boar. But before we dig deeper into Dimitri's rabbit hole, I'd like to make a request. If you'd kindly make that like button glow up below, it'll help ensure the growth of this small channel. I appreciate all the growth in the compact time frame that I've been doing these essays, and we're making steady progress towards 1,000 subs already. Thanks very kindly. By the time Azure Moon rolled around, Dimitri's completely surrendered to his darkness. Well, technically the Flame Emperor masking undid it. The Dimitri vs. Edelgard dialogue in chapter 12 in particular shows just how loud those voices are ringing now. When he corrects himself from saying, "I am tired of waiting," to "we are tired of waiting," that "we" referred to the victims of Dusker supposedly yelling at him to kill her. Still, Azure Moon is where we truly see him at his most unhinged. We're shown just how much the lie has consumed Dimitri in this phase. It's only in Azure Moon where he has only a sliver of hope in accepting the truth. Without it, he's doomed to the slavery of his delusions until death. The next section will cover the truth, but in this chapter, it's important to acknowledge the Boar phase of Dimitri and the role it played in his development. He's non-negotiable, irritable, and dismissive of any perspective that's thrown at him. He's quick to lash out at anyone, mainly because he's too busy trying to appease the dead, as opposed to aiding those who are still alive. The scene where he's talking to himself illustrates just how these ghosts are dictating his every move. Of course, it's Dimitri's own actions and the voices are literally a figment of his imagination, but they're real to him. There's further proof that the voices are nothing but his imagination. If they truly were his family's ghost, I find it hard to believe that they demand Dimitri to kill an innocent Edelgard. It's not like any of them ever saw the Flame Emperor unmasked either. Dimitri's lust for vengeance warped him into someone unrecognizable, borderline demonic. Azure Moon shows this without needing to tell us, but what makes it all the more tragic is that Dimitri still maintains some self-awareness in his state. If his constant evaluations of himself being a bloodstained monster wasn't enough, he came to terms with an irredeemable demon he became. So he saw futility in resisting his bloody impulses. He allowed the monster in him to take the reins and slew all that he deemed monsters like himself. The point of the regressive Savage Boar development is that Dimitri lost his internal war of the want and need. The lie fueled the want, and so he closed his eye to the truth. This is the physical manifestation of that failure. Boar Dimitri's behavior is something the player's supposed to criticize. There's no justification for his destructive path, and the reckless abandon of his struggling people. It's the focal point where his development into the positive change must occur. In all other routes, Dimitri fails at this, and goes down the path of the negative change arc. Funny enough though, in Crimson Flower, he's the most tame we've ever seen him, and with both eyes no less. Yet Hubert still considered him a savage in the same vein as the Dimitri we see in Azure Moon. Then again, I just ignore this remark because Crimson Flower's writing is just weird sometimes. The interesting part about the unhinged phase is that we still see a glimpse of what I like to call the true Dimitri slip through. We see him struggling with answers, like when Byleth asked him if he regretted killing the people on the bridge. His hesitation hinted at the true Dimitri trying to break through, because when it's all said and done, he's not a murderer at heart. And it's showing us that the internal war between the want and need is still ongoing. Just like what he said to Felix in their A support, his true nature is that of both the kind side and the Boar. The PTSD created the Boar, and it feuded with Dimitri for control. Another instance of true Dimitri slipping through is a minor conversation with an NPC monk in the monastery, just before Gronder 2 battle. The monk found himself surprised that monster still had some humanity left in it enough to pat a child on the head. That off-screen event was true Dimitri likely trying to break through again, if only briefly, though it'd have been nice if we actually got to see that instead of it just being told to us. Crimson Flower Dimitri may very well be the one who reined in the Boar just enough to keep a cooler head, while still harboring some bloodlust. But you know what, maybe I'll save this version of Dimitri for its own video in the future. Get this video to 500 likes, and I'll do it. Weiland describes a character's truth as a personalized antidote to the lie, the most important thing in their life. Dimitri up to this point gave no thought towards what was truly important or worth living for. His ghost derailed him off that path, and the truth only slipped further as his sanity diminished. Throughout Azure Moon, Gilbert, Rodrigue, and several others make it clear that taking back the kingdom capital was far more important than rushing headfirst into the empire. Dimitri's truth is simple. He needed to be a king to illuminate his kingdom from the darkness looming above it. But with his head already plunged into the darkness, he wasn't worthy of stepping up to the mantle, nor was he in the right state of mind to pursue it. So he needed to regain his grip on reality and prioritize his people. Dimitri receives the truth in two ways. The first is Rodrigue's death. It was a direct consequence of his actions up to the point of Gronder. Fleisch is an important character in his realization of the truth. Seeing the twisted face of a girl consumed by vengeance was like staring into a mirror, all because he brought upon the similar pain the Agarthans brought upon him. Granted, Byleth was the one who killed Randolph, her brother, but if Byleth didn't do that, Dimitri was intent on torturing him to death anyway. Poor Randy was f***ed no matter what. Dimitri's seen slightly smiling in a shot of him prior to being stabbed. This is no ordinary smile. It's one of a man likely laughing at himself as karma finally caught up to him. Rodrigue spared him that punishment and only gave him one half of the truth, that his place was to be king. It sent Dimitri back to square one, back to how he felt at Duscur. The second way Dimitri received the truth, and this time directly, is through Byleth. This scene in Arraign is not only where the truth is given to him, but this is where Dimitri is at his breaking point, an important turning point in a character's arc where the protagonist is at their lowest. This is where true Dimitri is finally able to be reached. Without Byleth's intervention, this would have been where the real Dimitri truly died inside. It was time to make Dimitri eat his own words. He told Byleth in the past to cling to whatever it was they lived for. Using this scene as a callback to Gerald's death was brilliant. It showed that Byleth took his advice to heart and returned his kindness by giving him the answer he already knew. Despite a somewhat rushed resolution after this scene, Dimitri finally learned the truth. He tamed the Boar at last, finally ready to take up the mantle of king. It was the only way to silence the voices and allow the dead to rest. He had to focus on the living, and through there, his actual dreams could come to fruition. Even though I hated how A supports worked in Three Houses, seeing a reformed Dimitri in these conversations was a nice closure to his arc. Coming to terms with his sins and accepting his duty as king while on his path to redemption is a powerful conclusion. Now, Dimitri's end goals are fine and all, but what truly matters the most is the journey. Dimitri's journey to kingship is unlike any other Fire Emblem protagonist. We've never had a lord so ensnared by the darkness of trauma to where they were at the whims of circumstance. Many lords have tragic backstories, but we've never seen one so negatively affected by it, and it was a fresh spin on the usual status quo. Things came back full circle for him once the voices quieted down. The murderous rampage he went on was that of a grieving man suffering internal disbelief the entire time. Dimitri always loved Edelgard, despite their short time together in the past. She was the only one left he could consider family after all. Him confronting Edelgard and his attempts to end the conflict peacefully were outstanding to see. This was the true, kind-hearted Dimitri before the tragedy warped him. His development from a savage killer to the savior king was one that left a lasting impression on both myself and many fans. Three Houses didn't have perfect writing. This video was almost entirely praise, but do not misinterpret my appreciation for Dimitri's writing as me saying it's flawless. In Azure Moon specifically, there are aspects of the plot that still peeve me to this day. Rodrigue's death, while pivotal to Dimitri's development, never made sense to me. Not that he shouldn't have died, but just the way it happened. Did bro just forget that he's a holy knight with ranged magic? Not to mention that the writers just conveniently forgot that Byleth can rewind time. Dedue's absence had one issue. He played next to no role in Dimitri's development in part 2. I get the intent behind the decision. Dedue's sacrifice in Ferdiad was probably what made Dimitri feel truly alone. His absence was probably just in case the player didn't complete his paralogue. Dedue dies off screen if you don't. But this guy is his most loyal friend. That's like if Hubert didn't show up until halfway into Crimson Flower. It was sweet to see a glimpse of the real Dimitri when he told Dedue not to die on him when he returned, but the main narrative tossed the relationship to the side as if it wasn't even worth the time. I really didn't like that. There's more about Dimitri's story that I felt had more room for improvement, but that deserves its own video, I think. The pros of his story far outweigh the cons anyway. I consider Dimitri to be a very important character in Fire Emblem. The writers took a huge risk by giving us a main character who didn't fit the mold of your typical Fire Emblem protagonist. I'm not taking a shot at other MCs when I say this, it's just that most of them share qualities without subverting expectations. Almost every hero is a lord of noble birth, have a strong sense of justice, and share personality traits with each other. Some even have similar circumstances, such as following the same plot of reclaiming their captured kingdom, just as Marth did. While Dimitri's background didn't brim with originality either, the presentation and journey subverted those tropes. Last I checked, no lord flew off the handle quite as hard as this lunatic did. Instead of falling victim to cliches, Dimitri took a trope and went in the opposite direction with it. There's no such thing as an original idea anymore in fiction, so a good writer knows how to take a trope and flesh it out with their own unique take. Dimitri showed that a main character can indeed explore several themes in their story. They don't have to delegate those dark elements to side characters and support conversations only, or present them but shroud them in ambiguity. Three Houses did show, don't tell justice here, despite the flaws. We saw a young man spiral into darkness and lose his sanity. He had to claw his way through many obstacles to reclaim it and become the man he aspired to be. His story had multiple meanings than what is on the surface, and that's a well-written character to me. In recent days, Three Houses faced criticism for being a lot more like a JRPG instead of the ultra-fun strategy game with an okay story. But there's nothing wrong with having a fun Fire Emblem game and a great story. They both can coexist. Dimitri, Edelgard, Claude, and many other Three Houses characters represent a hope for me that one day we can have a modern Fire Emblem game with the best of both worlds. One that's character-rich with immersive storytelling and an insanely fun and well-paced gameplay. Whether you love or hate it, Three Houses left a deep mark because countless fans, new and old, resonated with the cast. Every opinion is valid. So it's my belief that if the next string of games after Engage strikes a healthy balance between good writing and gameplay, they'll have the best damn Fire Emblem game ever. Personally, the Tellius games strike that balance for me. Ike will always be my favorite lord for being yet another protagonist who went against the standard, and I'm always having a good time with the games. However, that's just me. I know many people feel differently about Tellius, but hey, this ain't a Tellius video, so I'll shut up. Speaking of Tellius, Naysala, King of the Raven Tribe, will be my next mega big character arc essay for the channel. Relax, mega big is a placeholder name. Until then, I'll continue to make smaller essays to fill up the gap. I'll be replaying Tellius again really soon, so yeah, that's gonna take a while. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more Fodlan character essays, my last analysis was on Marianne. She has dark elements similar to Dimitri that you might find interesting to explore. You can check that out here on screen, but otherwise, subscribe to the channel for future video essays. Stay chill, y'all.